Welcome to Dominika Best Presents The Deviant Mind, a true crime podcast. This is Dominika Best, your host. I have always been interested in the mind and how we and our personalities can explode, damage, hurt, and even kill the people around us. It's why I've been an avid crime fiction reader all of my life, and now I'm a crime fiction author myself. True crime has always been the basis for so much of crime fiction because many times true events are incredibly insightful and also stranger than fiction. I'm not a therapist, but I do create characters for a living. I'm constantly digging deeper into what makes a person, how does their psychology drive their actions, and how do they affect the people around them. Why did they do what they did? These stories are integral to my fiction, and I'm looking forward to delving into the cases with you. Welcome to The Deviant Mind.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Deviant Mind podcast. We have a special episode today because I have invited a guest named Chris Gordon. He's a friend of mine who our kids go to school together, and he is an avid true crime aficionado. And after we do drop off, we talk about horrible crimes standing on the street corner. So I thought he would be the perfect person to come and talk about the specific case, which is the Idaho Student Murders that just happened about a month ago. So welcome to the pod, Chris.
Thank you so much, Dominika. It's a pleasure to be on. I'm a big fan of your podcast. And with regards to this episode, I got to say it is really confusing and disturbing. And I'm just happy to get into it with you because it's, your topics on other episodes have been really intense deep dives. So I feel like we're about to do the same with this case.
Yeah, and this case is crazy. And I have to say, I have been following it through all the media because obviously it's a gigantic case right now. And the creepy thing is that these kids did everything right. It wasn't like they were on the first floor by themselves, letting a stranger in. It was like they were with their friends. They had gone to parties. They got home on time.
Mm-hmm.
And just the fact that this could happen while they were comfortably in their home with roommates and people in their beds, that was something that was really disturbing to me. So,
Same.
But before we go into the timeline of the case, I want to focus on the victims and who they actually were. So we're going to start with that first. And I unfortunately found a lot of this information from their obituaries, which was heartbreaking because all of these kids were so young. The first one we're going to speak about is Kaylee Jade Goncalves, and she was the daughter of Steve and Christy Goncalves, born on June 8th, 2001 in Concord, California. Kaylee was the middle child of 5, and she was the ultimate middle child. She was full of fire and life and was up for the next adventure. When Kaylee was 1, the family moved to North Idaho. And like any girl, she loved Claire's and fashion and accessories, and she really embraced life. Now, the girl that she was murdered with was her best friend who she had met in 6th grade at Charter Academy Middle School, and her name was Madison Mogen. They became inseparable, and Madison, which she was actually known as Maddie, became part of Kaylee's family. And she said she was her chosen sister. They both went to the University of Idaho, and Kaylee joined the Alpha Phi sorority, and she wanted to be an elementary school teacher. Her sister, Alvia Goncalves, said that, quote, she had recently bought a 216 Range Rover, planned a trip to Europe next year, and wanted to move to Texas after graduation. She had a job lined up, and she had plans for the future. And Maddie and Kaylee were true sisters, and unfortunately they died together, which, again, is just heartbreaking.
At the same time, it is as terrible, obviously, as it is. It is nice to know, since they were so close, that ultimately that they were together. I mean, I
Yeah.
guess that's some silver lining in a really horrible case, but it does make me happy, and I'm sure perhaps the families that they were so close that they were together at the time.
Yeah, that they could draw some sort of comfort from that. It's just, anyway. So just, yeah, there's not much to say besides, oh my
Yeah.
God, this case is just something else. So there's a quote from the Coeur d'Alene Post-Falls Press, and this is also part of her obituary, Kaylee's. Quote, throughout all of her years of education, Kaylee maintained incredible grades and made friends wherever she went. She was social, quirky, contagious, and a little bit of a goofball. Sorry, Kaylee, that's true. She loved to play pranks on her friends and family constantly. She loved adventure. She was a hard worker, always having a full-time job on top of her studies, even in high school. She loved the nicer things in life and took a lot of pride in buying those things for herself. And she was strong, she was fair, she was dedicated, and she was love, which was probably written by her family. And again, just gone way too soon because I believe she was only 21. Her friend Madison Maddie Mae Mogen was born on May 25th, 2001 in Eugene, Oregon to Benjamin Mogen and Karen Laramie. Maddie moved back to northern Idaho when she was 2, and by all accounts, she had a wonderful childhood. She met Kaylee in 6th grade, and they both convinced their parents to let them go to Lake City High School because I believe the charter academy was a private school. And Maddie was known for her offbeat sense of humor and loved to make people laugh as well. Everyone who knew her, she told her said that they never let her go hungry because apparently she had some issues with that. She excelled in school and all the jobs that she worked throughout in high school. She was so excited to attend the University of Idaho and made the dean's list every semester. She joined Pi Beta Pi and made loads of friends with Kaylee close by. And she also had a boyfriend, Jake, who was the love of her life. And she loved sparkly pink things that were tiny and cute. So again, these girls were normal American girls, loving life,
That's what
excited their futures.
And that's what I find so interesting about these victims. All seemingly really nice people, really good kids who didn't come from any sort of broken family. They were very caring. And I've heard nothing negative with regards to the victims. There's nothing out there that says they were involved in anything nefarious or crazy.
They were just innocents. As our conversation goes on, there was definitely some talk about Kaylee, I believe, having a stalker, which could potentially have been Bryan Kohberger. But we'll get into that as the case goes through. These two girls were very beautiful as well, so I'm sure they probably got male attention, and I kind of wondered if they got his attention somehow. Talk about terrible luck. The third victim was a girl named Xana Kernodle, who was born in Coeur d'Alene, and I probably am not pronouncing that correctly, in Idaho on July 5th, 2002, to Jeff Kernodle and Kara Northington. She had a brother, Elijah, and a sister, Jasmine, and as a child, she was a gifted gymnast. And throughout her schooling, she played volleyball, track, and soccer. She graduated in 2020 from Post Falls High School and headed to the University of Idaho. She majored in marketing and was in the Pi Beta Phi sorority. She also was a member of the Vandal Solutions sales team. She had a part-time job at Mad Greek restaurant in Moscow. I'm kind of wondering if she actually met Maddie there because they seem to be both in the same sorority, which is probably how she ended up in that house.
Yeah.
Xana loved electronic dance music. She loved going to concerts and her family and friends. She was a positive and outgoing person, and she loved spending time as a kid at her grandma and grandpa's farm. And she also had an amazing sense of humor. Ethan Chapin, her boyfriend, who was found dead next to her, was born on October 28th, 2002, and he was a triplet, which is pretty unique. His parents were Jim and Chapin and Stacy Wells. He had a sister named Maisie Chapin and a brother named Hunter Chapin, and he was the one who was born first in the triplets. He was very athletic and played soccer, basketball, and ran cross country. He lived in Conway, Washington, and attended Mount Vernon High School, which is crazy because I am also a gardener, and this is a total aside. But the
Mhm.
woman who I follow very closely, Florette Flowers, she's in Mount Vernon, and it's a really small community. And I was like, oh my gosh, I know exactly where he's from. I've driven
Mm.
through that town before. It's a huge flower farming community.
Oh,
And
wow.
he, in fact, during COVID, he worked in Tulip Town during tulip season. They're very famous for their tulips over there. You can go during tulip, and there's just fields and fields of beautiful tulips.
Wow.
He actually also worked at Hills Resort, which I guess was in Idaho, when his school was not in session because of COVID. And I just realized that these kids missed a lot of college and high school because of COVID.
Yeah.
Which was again another tragedy because we were all in lockdown.
Right.
And so everybody's lives got shut down. And so their last 3 years were
Yeah.
in lockdown, which
For nothing, during the heat of the pandemic, as a lot of cases of depression, uh, really dark times in our society, having to be basically shut down to just your home. These kids had one another, despite the education on Zoom or internet, whatever they were doing. They were still able to be with one another. I do think that's interesting that they never excluded in-person friendships, seemingly, despite the online education having to be on lockdown.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And then just lives cut too short. So all of his triplets, actually, like all the brothers and sisters, they all went to the University of Idaho. And Ethan and Hunter joined Sigma Chi frat, and Maisie joined Kappa Alpha Theta sorority. And he loved social life and sports at university. And if he wasn't on the golf course or working, he was playing pickleball, sand volleyball, or surfing. And he loved to laugh. So those are the 4 victims. I was able to find the probable cause affidavit that was
Mm-hmm.
used to arrest Bryan Kohberger. And
Mm-hmm.
he was written by Corporal Brett Payne of the Moscow Police Department, County of Laeta, State of Idaho. And he outlined the case to be able to get the arrest warrant. So here we go into
Well,
this.
actually, if you don't mind, before we jump into
Yeah.
that, you mentioned Xana, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Is that how you pronounce her name? It is interesting to note, and maybe I'm jumping ahead myself, that the lawyer representing Bryan, the killer, supposed killer, we'll see, guilty, innocent until proven guilty, but his lawyer, Ann Taylor, and not to be confused with the designer, Ann Taylor, was also in the process and had in the process represented Kayla's mother in court. Her mother had issues with drug addiction. And on January 5th, Xana's mother was actually arrested 5 days after her daughter was murdered, and she was brought up on charges of drug possession. And Ann Taylor was her lawyer and had been her lawyer for the past few years with her drug addiction. And then
Oh.
when this came up, Ann Taylor filed an attorney withdrawal notice to no longer represent Xana's mother and instead defend Bryan. So that's
Oh,
very
wow.
interesting. The fact that she didn't recuse herself. I mean, this would have been a perfect opportunity to say, "Hey, I'm representing the victim's mom. This is too weird." So that's very interesting to me. She kind of left Xana's mother high and dry to essentially defend possibly her daughter's killer.
Her daughter's killer. Yeah. And because it's such a high profile case, then I'm sure,
Yeah,
now she's all over the news. That's really disappointing. I did read about that, and I wondered if the mother, Kara, had some sort of relapse, because I can't imagine what the
right,
families must have gone through
for
with
sure.
this tragedy, it being so violent, and then of course, like
Hmm.
all the media
Hmm.
coming and camping out everywhere. Like, I can't imagine for somebody who's in recovery how difficult that would be. And
Yeah,
then having your lawyer drop you because she's going to be defending the person who could potentially have killed your child. I can't even imagine.
I mean, well,
It's
incidentally,
just,
I was able to see an interview with her mother, and she's just heartbroken. She's very
oh,
confused as to why, her attorney for the past few years just dropped her, you know.
Oh, that's just
So that's
horrible.
got to be very difficult. And yeah, as you suggested, it's an escape. And when something like this happens to your daughter, whom you love, it's understandable, you know.
Yeah. And now, has the lawyer said anything about this?
As far as I know, no. Other than filing this attorney withdrawal notice, I believe she's been obviously hounded by some media, but she's mum's the word.
I think the judge put a gag order on everybody to not talk to
Everybody, which I
anyone
find
about
very
this.
interesting. There is a
Yeah.
complete it's a big blanket of a gag order over everyone involved in this case. So that's also pretty unique. I mean, I don't know any
Yeah.
situation where a judge has gagged everybody.
Everybody, exactly.
So that could be another reason why Ann Taylor is remaining silent.
Yeah, that she, because she's not allowed to. Otherwise, she'd be in a whole lot of trouble.
Right.
That's fascinating. And again, also a tragedy on top of a tragedy.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that I was going to say is that in the affidavit, the two roommates are only listed by their initials. And now, through my research, I was able to find their names, but they are getting so hounded by the media that I think that for our podcast today, I'm just going to keep with their initials because I don't want to cause them any more distress and out them
Absolutely.
more than they already have been outed. So,
Yeah.
the two it's are DM and BF, and the affidavit, a lot of it is their statement about what happened that night, and so we'll just keep their names out of this so they can have some bit of privacy, which I can't imagine how hard it must be to have lost your friends, been in the house, potentially could have been a victim, and now you're getting hounded by the media. It's just,
yeah. And also the survivor's guilt survivor guilt is intense. I mean, it can really, you're already dealing with post-traumatic syndrome, and then that's part of it is, why did I live?
Yeah.
You know,
and especially since one of them saw the man, like, why did he just walk right by me and out the door and not kill me too? Which is, again, yeah. But okay, so let's go through the chronology of the timeline.
Yeah.
On the night of November 12th, 2022, Ethan Chapin, age 20, and Xana Kernodle, age 20, were seen by their roommate BF at the Sigma Chi house on the University of Idaho campus at 735 Nextpurse Drive from around 9 p.m. to 1:45 a.m. on November 13th. BF estimates that Ethan and Xana got home around 1:45 a.m. Ethan didn't live at the King Road residence, but he was staying overnight with Xana that night. Now, at the same night, Kaylee Goncalves, age 21, and Madison Mogen, 21, were at the Corner Club bar on Main Street in Moscow. The police have video footage of them leaving at around 1:30 a.m. on November the 13th. And then they also got video at around 1:30 of Kaylee and Madison going to a food truck called the Grub Truck. And they were seen on the Twitch live stream from that night, which I watched that footage. And again, it's really hard to see like the last hours of somebody's death. And, they were just like ordinary college kids getting some food after a night of drinking, like just
and interestingly
totally
enough,
normal.
In that video footage, there's it jumps to what seems to be some sort of altercation with two men. One of them is a hooded gentleman.
I didn't notice that.
Yes, and in fact, let me see. It was I believe it was Madison. In this video, you can see her kind of telling him to F off, and she's pointing at him. So people don't know. They tracked him down. He was initially a suspect, but they parted ways, and they had no relationship whatsoever with this person. I think everyone was just kind of out of it, and maybe they partied.
kind of drunk after like the bars closed and getting. Did he have an alibi for that night? Or I guess if the police excluded him.
Yeah, the police excluded him because I think it was based upon evidence that in his interviews that I really didn't know these people at all.
Got it. So it was just like one of those, hey, I'm just going to be an annoying guy to a girl, and the girl's going to say like, get away from me, and away they go.
And the other thing is, I think that eliminated him was the fact that when you watch the video, when you see them exit and leave, he stays. So he's not like
So he
going
didn't
after
follow them or
and-
anything like that.
Right.
I see.
Yeah.
I see. Okay. An undisclosed person did give them a ride home from the food truck to the King Road residence, and the police said that he initially was a suspect and they cleared him as well. Both roommates, DM and BF, said that the foursome were all home by 2 a.m. and that they were either asleep or in their rooms by 4 a.m. And Xana had gotten DoorDash order to their house, and she got that at 4 a.m., which is like minutes before whoever killed them came into that house. So, but the DoorDash person, they also cleared him and they talked to him, and he said he saw nothing. He just delivered the food and away he went. When I had originally started hearing about the case, I was very confused about the layout of this house.
Me too.
Because I just couldn't imagine like what it was. And so I did a ton of research and I found a fantastic article that obviously had the same problems I did and you about like what it was, because it was a weird house that had 3 stories, but 2 of the stories were on the ground because they were on a hillside. I will also post the floor plans on Instagram and the pictures, so you guys can actually reorient yourselves to this, because it was kind of important where the bedrooms were in the pathway of this killer. The house had 6 bedrooms and it was built into the hillside, and the bottom level looked like it was an addition. So it had 3 separate floors and there was an exterior entrance on each floor, even though on the 3rd floor, the exterior entrance was to a balcony, and the balcony didn't look like it had stairs to it. So I don't know if somebody could have accessed the 3rd floor bedrooms through that 3rd exterior entrance. However, on the 1st floor, which was kind of like almost the basement level for like one side, but it was, again, because it was right next to the hill. It's when you see the pictures of the house, it's where the cars are in front and there's like a wreath on the door. So that was that initial ground level 1st floor. And there was bedrooms on either side of stairs and a bathroom. And then there were stairs going to the 2nd floor. Now, the 2nd floor, I think, was probably originally the 1st floor, and it had a living room, the kitchen, and 2 bedrooms. On that very first ground floor is where one of the surviving inmates was at the time of the deaths. And then when you went to the 2nd floor / 1st floor, the roommate who had seen him was in one of the bedrooms, and in the other bedroom was where Xana and Ethan were found. And there was also a sliding glass door that was the entrance to go into the kitchen, which it sounds like that's the way the killer exited, even though nobody really knows, at least from where I could find, how he entered the home. And so the kitchen had the sliding glass doors, and that was on a deck. So it went onto a deck that kind of spanned the entire back of the home. And then the 3rd floor was accessed by the stairs that were right next to and I'm not sure if it was DM or the other roommate's bedroom, but they went up to the 3rd floor, which had 2 bedrooms and a bathroom as well. And those were Kaylee Goncalves and Madison Mogen's bedrooms, and there was a bathroom up there as well. I did find a statement by Steve Goncalves, who's Kaylee's dad, that they said that because the 2 girls were such close friends in childhood, they were sleeping together in the same room that night. So when their bodies were found, they were actually found in the same bed. And Kaylee had just gotten a new puppy named Murphy, and who was home at the time of the crimes, but he was found in another room. And police have stated they found no evidence on the dog, so that the dog must have not gotten any blood on himself. But per the affidavit and the statement of DM, so she must have been the one who was on the 2nd floor bedroom. She said she woke up at around 4 a.m. by what sounded to her like Kaylee Goncalves playing with her dog Murphy, who was a mini golden doodle, upstairs in one of the 3rd floor bedrooms. And then a short time later, she thought she heard Kaylee say something to the effect of, "There's someone here." Which, again, waking up at 4 a.m. and hearing that, terrifying, just absolutely terrifying.
Now, was that, since it's around the same time that DoorDash arrives, could it have been there's someone here, meaning the DoorDash is here?
That's actually, it's interesting. Yes, that could actually be that, because that's around 4 a.m. is where the DoorDash, but she didn't say that she heard Kaylee go down the stairs to open up the door for the DoorDash guy.
Right.
She just heard her say from upstairs. And now now this was from the affidavit, but I saw some articles saying that maybe it wasn't Kaylee who was actually saying there's someone here, but maybe Xana. And police also thought that maybe that there's someone here could have come from Xana Kernodle, because her cell phone records showed she was on TikTok at around 4:12 a.m. So she was awake and not being woken up by anything. DM, the roommate, said she looked out of her bedroom but didn't see anything when she heard that comment. And when she said she opened up a door a second time, she heard crying coming from Xana Kernodle's room. And she also said she heard a male voice say something like, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." So I'm wondering if Xana and Ethan were attacked first. And it doesn't state in this chronology what who the police think were killed first and then second. But I'm kind of wondering with the statements if they were the ones who were first attacked, which again, I wonder, I looked at pictures of Ethan. He's a big guy. So I'm wondering, and if Xana was awake because she was on TikTok, then how did the killer essentially keep him quiet? Like, was he attacked first and incapacitated, and then Xana went into shock? But they don't really go into that kind of detail in this affidavit.
Also interesting to know with the dog, because I know it's come up, hey, why wasn't the dog killed? And they believe, if this were Bryan, which it's looking like it was, that since he's a vegan and an animal lover, he spared Murphy.
I see.
So that's pretty interesting.
That is pretty interesting. So he wasn't one of those I guess, from the research, he doesn't look like he's one of those serial killers who hurt animals. Yeah. Okay. I guess.
So my thing is also like, if I kind of wish, and maybe, I don't know, if the dog were to see Bryan, what kind of reaction the dog would have.
Yeah, like if you would actually recognize him, be afraid of him. Right. That's actually, I wonder if the police thought of doing that. They have a lot of evidence. They have DNA evidence, as we will go into, and those cell phone pings, which were, when going through the affidavit, they knew his movements through his cell phone, even though he turned it off for the 4 hours. So in court, I guess they could say, well, we don't really know where he was in those 4 hours that he turned off his phone. But then when he turned it back on again, it's like the path is like right there.
Right. I think as they try to do in other cases, the defendants are going to try to come back with how strong is that paint with regards to how much area do the towers pick up. So in other words, the defense is thinking he could have been on the store, but it pings to that tower, the closest tower to the house, because that might have been. Right.
Right. No, that's definitely a good point. But let's hold off on that through the thing, just to keep the chronology going. Police found footage from a security camera from a house next door at 4:17 a.m. that picked up distorted audio of what sounded like voices or a whimper with a loud thud. Now, a dog can also be heard barking numerous times starting at 4:17 a.m. And this camera was less than 50 feet from the west wall of Xana Kernodle's bedroom. So here's my question to you. Why did the roommate not talk about the dog barking? Nothing in her statement ever talks about dog barking, either of them.
And nor do I believe does she discuss hearing. She mentions the crying, but nothing about a thud.
No, exactly. But then she also said that she was in a shocked state, which we don't ever know how there's a killer in your house. There's something happening. Well, I can't imagine how I would behave in that
Right.
circumstance, right? I mean, it's like the classic fight or flight
Yeah.
for
And
a
that could have
freeze.
also been part of her saying, being on the assumption that Murphy was being played with. Maybe the barking,
Right.
she could have assumed, oh, he's just playing.
Maybe that's the barking was what she thought was playing. That's what woke her up, was him barking. Okay, that actually that does make a little bit of sense. DM said she opened her door a third time after she heard crying, and that's when she saw, quote, a figure clad in black clothing and a mask that covered the person's mouth and nose walking towards her. DM described the figure as 5'10" or taller, male, not muscular, but athletically built with bushy eyebrows. The male walked past DM as she stood in a frozen shock phase, and that's quotes that's what she called it. And he walked toward the sliding glass door in the kitchen, and DM locked herself in her room, and she said she didn't recognize the male. And now I don't know, because I know you've done a lot of research on this, the 911 call, which has not been released. Why did they not check what happened? So the 911 call comes from one of the roommates' cell phones at 11:58 a.m.
That's
on
like close to
November
8 hours
13th.
after the fact.
Yes. And that is definitely in 8 hours. That is all over the news. Like, what in the world happened in that 8 hours?
Now, to me, that is very interesting. I understand the point that folks have been trying to make, that it's an extreme state of shock, right? Doesn't know how to make the call. But when the call is made to report it as an unconscious person 8 hours later is a bit off. Obviously, no one wasn't, they're deceased. They're not unconscious.
Yeah. The other thing, I did actually, not to interrupt you, but I did actually go down a little bit of the rabbit hole into the unconscious individual 911 call. And so apparently in this county of Whitcomb 911, they are severely understaffed, and that the standard protocol states that when callers are agitated, they're going to give the call a generic label of unconscious person instead of wasting time getting specific details.
Got it.
So that looked like it was more of protocol why they were labeled the unconscious individual.
Right.
But still, 8 hours? Did those girls go back to sleep? And
also within that time, I found out they had visitors. They had friends come to the house, which obviously contaminates the crime scene. And it's also been assumed that perhaps, in addition to the shock, they may have been under the influence of something, whether or not they're drunk.
Which is why they did not want to call 911, because like the bodies of Xana and Ethan, they were in and out of the room, and the DM's bedroom was right off of the living room. So they're like dead bodies lying like 15 feet away from your door.
Right. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if, I'm sure perhaps you would do the same. If I wake up and I find my roommates deceased, I'm calling 911 like immediately. So to have friends come, and then that's the interesting thing is, which is also in this affidavit, and you'll get, I'm sure you'll get to that, the footprint. If you have friends come up, who knows when that was left?
Right. I mean, it opens like a perfect defense. It's like, well, how do you know it was his shoe if they had friends over?
Right.
So, so that's still.
That bothers me a lot that they waited that long.
Yeah, like it's just, and again, there is the shock, and there could maybe be drugs involved. We don't know,
right?
Because they're 20-year-olds freaking out, being like, "Oh my God, I can't get in trouble." But I'm sure there's something going on in your brain with the PTSD, right? Of the survivors, the blood smell. Could you imagine that house must have smelled like with all the blood?
Yeah,
and. So I can understand there's like the whole shock thing, but then inviting people over. Now we're in the age of true crime, everything, right? There's entire channels of true crime documentaries and podcasts. Maybe these kids were like happy and go lucky and never really got into true crime, but it just seems that there's an inherent, what do you do? You call 911. I would be calling 911 the moment that guy went towards the kitchen.
100%.
there's somebody in my house.
Yeah.
But then it was after a night of drinking. So maybe there is something to do with the alcohol, and if there were maybe other drugs involved that they're just not talking about, because again, they're also victims. So this is like definitely not victim blaming. They're in college, they're having a good time.
Yeah.
But maybe that's part of that 8 hours. But it's weird. Like, again, seeing a man in your house, hearing like thumps, smelling blood. I mean, it must have been such a strong metallic smell coming out of that living room, and just going back to sleep.
Yeah. The other thing is, from what I understand, this house was a gateway to partying. The Greek life is very prominent in this school and obviously in other schools. In fact, 2 weeks prior to this horrible event, cops had been summoned to their house a couple times for noise complaints. And one of the cops threatened them by saying, if this keeps up, if you don't turn on the music, we're going to contact the Greek council. So that absolutely terrified them. And there's this kind of weird sorority culture. And that may have also played a part in them holding off on calling 911. Like, what's
and
going to
maybe
happen
calling, because also maybe they called their Greek presidents if they were already in trouble. So maybe they called the people who are the top of their sorority, being like, oh my God, what do we do?
Right.
To get, okay. So that actually, that is, could be an explanation for that as well.
The other interesting thing is the mask covering the mouth and the nose it leads me to believe they were wearing a pandemic mask.
That's what I was thinking too. Like, it wasn't like, that's the way it read. It was a pandemic mask, not I'm breaking into your house and wearing a mask. Which, thanks pandemic and COVID, yet one more thing that we have. It's just mask people going around everywhere, and it's totally normal. The police arrived, and I couldn't, from this affidavit, because it was written by one guy, he arrived at 4. But I'm assuming, but he said that when he arrived, he was given a tour. The bodies were still in place, but the forensic team was already on the scene taking evidence. But he was able to describe exactly what the bodies looked like. So those bodies were still on that ground at 4 o'clock.
Wow.
And again, the 911 call came in at noon. So I don't know how, I couldn't find exactly a timeline of how quickly the cops came and the forensics came, but the affidavit picks up at 4 p.m. on November the 13th. And he said, again, that the bodies of Xana Kernodle and Ethan Chapin Chapin, I really should have seen how to pronounce his name. I'm so sorry. Were found in the second, or that main floor bedroom right off of the living room. And both had wounds made by an edged weapon, and which they later said would be a knife. And when the police went to the 3rd floor, they found the bodies of Madison Mogen and Kaylee Goncalves in a single bed in one of the bedrooms. They were deceased with visible stab wounds. And the police also found a tan leather knife sheath lying on the bed next to Mogen's right side. Now, they also said that, and this was the father, Steve, said that Kaylee's wounds compared to Madison's wounds were very different. Kaylee's body, from what the dad said, was like just torn to shreds, which I have read quite a bit that people are really wondering if she was the main victim, the initial person he went to kill, and then he killed all the others. Although, again, why did he not kill the other 2 roommates, who were both female as well?
And she was with Ethan.
Dana was with Ethan.
So the other idea, and I don't mean to interject here and take away, but there's this theory that this killer is an incel. And for those out there who don't know, there tend to be males who throughout their life have had some issues meeting women, dating women, and there's a lot of resentment there. So there is actually a culture of incels who, there was actually a case not long ago, a terrible shooting where, I'm blanking on the killer's name, but it doesn't matter. He created incel videos saying, I've had enough.
Oh, is this the shooting in Santa Barbara?
Yes, it was. Yes, it was.
Yeah. And the kid of the famous director.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he would film couples on the beach and make commentary like, oh, look at these beautiful people. So I think it was, with regards to her getting the worst of it, some have implied it's because she had a boyfriend, and he, if there was any prior attraction, any sort of connection that those 2 may have had in the past, that he was really upset that,
For that Xana Kernodle had a boyfriend, because I
Correct.
think Kaylee had a boyfriend too.
Yes, and
I believe
broke up.
Jack.
Yes.
Oh, they had just broken up because they were taking care of the dog together, because they had gotten the dog together, and then they were going back and forth with the dog.
Right.
That's right. Yeah, no, definitely. I didn't find he was very, we'll get to this on the section on Bryan, but he definitely was busy on forums, but he had some other issues outside of incel, but I could easily see him being plugged into the incel community just the way that he was talking about kind of his high school life. But we'll get to him. Let's see how he is found out, because in this affidavit, oh boy, I have to say this is some really good police work. They did not let up on this at all. So going back to the knife sheath, when it was processed, they found K-bar on it, USMC on it, and the United States Marine Corps Eagle Globe and anchor insignia stamped on the outside of it. They also found a single source of male DNA left on the button snap of the knife sheath. Now, they went through all the records. It looks like this knife is not standard issue, and they could not find Bryan Kohberger in any Marine directories army. Like he had wanted to do that when he was in high school, but it looks like he never went through with it. And they believe he probably bought the knife at like one of those supply stores that have a lot of military equipment in it. Because, hey, America, what's up?
Hey.
we sell military equipment to the public. And then the forensics also processed the scene where they found a latent shoe print that had a diamond-shaped pattern similar to the pattern of a Vans type shoe sole that was just outside the door of DM's bedroom, which could have been the guy that she saw. But then if it was in front, was she 2 feet away from this guy as he was walking by her? Because if you open the door and his footprint is like right in front of your door, that means like you're 2-3 feet away from a killer.
Easily. Yeah.
Which when I read that, I was like, oh my God, I can't imagine what this woman must have been feeling like when she saw that. Once they found that footprint, they did an extensive search of what's called a video canvas in the area, and they found footage of a white sedan with no front license plate making 3 initial passes by the King Road residence starting at 3:39 a.m. and leaving by Walenta Drive. And this was a residential neighborhood with limited vehicles in these early morning hours. This white sedan entered the area again at around 4:04 a.m. and attempted to park in front of the King Road residence or turn around and was unsuccessful. He made a 3-point turn at the nearest intersection and then was driving up and down a dead-end road named Queen Road.
What's interesting also with regards to the layout of the house, what's interesting is that the house itself is pretty tucked in away. It's not the sort of house that you drive and, oh, there's a house. Like you definitely wind up and around.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
That's an interesting thing. Like basically you would have to know where this house is to drive by it.
Yeah, like he's picking it for a reason, not, hey, this is a perfect house, I'm going to go kill some co-eds, but just more of, I have a reason for this. And as we find out, he did know because he had staked out this place 12 times before. They sent this footage. Oh, and then so the white sedan was seen departing the area of the King Road residence at around 4:20 at a high rate of speed, which is right after the murders. The cameras picked the car going through the neighborhood out of town and towards Whitman County, Washington. And this road leads to Pullman, Washington, which is only 10 miles away from Moscow, Idaho. And they're both small college towns. So the police sent this footage to the FBI and its forensic examiner, who said that the vehicle was a 2011-2016 white Hyundai Elantra. And now the police were just on this car. They pulled video footage from Washington State University. They pulled it from any businesses going in and out of both towns. And they were able to track the path this white sedan took off campus towards Moscow at around 2:44 a.m. and on November 30th. And with this new footage, the FBI forensic examiner was able to place the car as a 2014 to 2016 Hyundai Elantra. And they were able to track the sedan coming in and out of Pullman and the WSU campus at around 5:25. And so here's the other thing. Like, you always think these killers are geniuses. And I think Bryan, just from everything that I've read, because I personally think he did do it. But yes, he's innocent until proven guilty by a court of law. But he makes some dumb mistakes for being a PhD criminology student. And somebody asked me, like, why do these guys like make these dumb mistakes? And I'm like, because they think they're the smartest person. Like, how does he not know that his car is going to be on all these cameras? Like, they were able, like, in this affidavit, they were able to like figure out his path for like days. Like, they got camera footage going back a month, and that's how they were months. That's how they were able to figure out also that he had been stalking this house, because the Elantra had been seen in the neighborhood. So it wasn't just the cell phone pings, at least that I was read. But so, yeah, it's just, again, these killers most of the time are just, they're not like the ones that you see on TV. Like,
the thing I
just
thought,
not geniuses.
Off the bat, I was thinking he was perhaps sloppy intentionally to make it seem as though I'm a criminologist, I'm a psychology major, I would never do anything like that. It's some other sloppy killer. That's the only thing I could think of why he might have been I mean, look, Ted Bundy, BTK. BTK also had a degree in psychology. And you have these kind of like smarties, but eventually they get caught because they make a slip. But I think he does it off the bat because perhaps it's like, I'm way too smart to do anything like that. It can't possibly be me.
Right.
And
but then at the same time, he left the car in front of his apartment. Like, I thought I had read that he had tried to get rid of it, but he didn't. He just tried to. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, but he didn't. And in the early morning after the murders, his car is seen back at the house. Like, he drove by, like maybe to check out the scene, see if there were cops there, something. But he did go back.
They just can't help themselves.
They can't help themselves. They have to go see what's going on and what they did. And another person, a detective, broke down the fact that the murder itself and this whole event may have only taken him 6 minutes. When you look at the time, he has a very little amount of time. Like, when you look at from the time that he leaves and you hear all these things, they're suspecting that it might have only taken him 6 minutes to do this carnage, which is just absolutely crazy to me.
It's absolutely crazy. Yeah, that to me.
To work that quickly.
Yeah, exactly. And go up and down stairs. And I don't know if the two girls upstairs were sleeping, but again, it's like when you're dealing with two people, like I know some of the victims had defensive marks on their hands. So they were awake. To be able to overcome them was also, a complete nightmare. But again, good for the cops, man. They did their due diligence. They started searching for that car on November 25th, 2022. And then on November 29th, Washington State University officer Daniel Tiengo queried white Elantras registered at WSU. And he found a 2015 Elantra with Pennsylvania license plates, which Pennsylvania doesn't require a front license plate, which is the reason why there was no front license plate on his car. And that car was registered to Bryan Kohberger. And then the WSU officer Curtis Whitman found that car parked in Bryan Kohberger's residence. And when they pulled Bryan's license, and this was pulled by Officer Corporal Brett Payne, he matched the description that DM had said, that he was a white male with a height of 6 feet and weighed 185 pounds and had bushy eyebrows. And so they started doing traffic stops on him, and they were able to get his cell phone number. And the police were then got a search warrant for the night of the murders. And they were able to pinpoint that his cell phone was in the area of Kings Road residence 12 times before the night of the murders. But he was tricky and turned off he turned off his phone for the 4 hours. I think it was from like 2 o'clock to 5 o'clock. The phone was turned off or on airplane mode, but then he clicked it back on again to that same route. It was, again, not very smart. And then It was interesting because in the affidavit, they talked about Bryan Kohberger being by himself in the car. But
Mhm.
then in a lot of different news articles, he was pulled over twice driving cross country with his father back to Pennsylvania.
Right.
It was a little confusing in the affidavit about like how many times he was pulled over for traffic violations before he left Washington, because then in that cross country trip, it has been reported that they were pulled over twice. And I remember talking to you about how you said how freaked out he was the first time that the
Yeah.
body cam police guy, the police officer got him, like he was driving and he was like freaked out that they were pulling him over again.
Yeah.
So he had been pulled over like 2-3 times before in Washington. So he must have known like the jig
Yeah.
was going to be about up.
Yeah. It seems like every time they get pulled over, he's like, this is it. His mentality, his mind must have been like, oh, and here it is. Now I'm going to get arrested. Now I'm going to get arrested.
And now I'm going to get arrested. And now I'm going to get arrested.
Yeah.
And this is around the time that the FBI got involved because he's moving states now.
Yep.
On December 27th, 2022, Pennsylvania agents grabbed the trash from the Kohberger family residence located in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania, and they sent it to the Idaho State Lab, and the DNA was profiled and found that the male DNA of the father of suspect Bryan was a 99.9998 match.
Yeah.
And Bryan didn't have any brothers. So he was arrested in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania on December 30th, 2022, and he let himself be extradited to Idaho.
Yeah.
Because he wanted to know what they had on him.
With regards to not having a brother, he does have two sisters. And one of them, before becoming a school psychiatrist, I think a school counselor. She was an actress. And it's interesting to note that she was in actually a low-budget horror film. And the plot of the film involved college students getting killed by a serial killer.
I have a theory. It might be a crazy theory, but we can talk about it once we find out all about who Bryan actually is.
Yeah.
And this kind of talks about true crime and true crime books. And because he had a PhD, but we can talk about that when it gets there. But that was when you told me, I was like, oh my God, seriously? Like, how can that be a thing? But then it fits into my theory of this. I will most likely be proven wrong, but I do have kind of an idea about it. But so let's talk about Bryan. And who was he? So he was a first semester PhD student in criminology at Washington State University, which was located, one place says 10 miles, one place says 8 miles away from the murder scene.
Yeah.
He was born in November 1994, and at the time of his arrest, he was 28. He was from Albrightsville, which was a tiny hamlet in the Poconos, and it has a population of 211 people in 2020. 211 people. That's just, that is not even tiny. That's like, I don't even know what that is.
Possible in 2020.
Yeah, right? To have 200 people in a town. He graduated from Pleasant Valley High School in Brodheadsville, Pennsylvania. And from a news article in the New York Times reported by Mike Baker and Nicholas Bogle Burroughs, he had a difficult time in high school. Now, this article, I will, of course, post it in the show notes. Really, they interviewed a lot of his classmates to try to figure out who this guy really was.
Mm-hmm.
And they also went digging onto online forums and uncovered a condition that he had, which I'm wondering is going to be brought up by the defense as well.
Mm-hmm.
But when in 2011, he wrote, quote, "I feel like an organic sack of meat with no self-worth." And when he was 16, and this is when he was 16, in the same post, "As I hug my family, I look into their faces. I see nothing. It is like I'm looking at a video game, but less." And the journalists had uncovered evidence that he was an, quote, "anxious, isolated, and depressed teenager who turned to heroin."
Mm-hmm.
End quote. And so and most of the quotes in the article from the New York Times came from an online forum called Tapatalk, and it was previously called Youku. And he and other users would talk about a condition called visual snow.
Yeah.
And so apparently this condition is where your vision is obscured by scattering dots like static on an analog TV, which I know most people don't know what an analog TV is, but it was like that static snow. And that he became pretty suicidal and he completely changed. They had photos of him from, I think, freshman year of high school to going to senior year. And he had been like a round-faced, chubby kid freshman year. And by senior year, he was very thin. He had supposedly lost a lot of weight because he had gone on special diets to try to figure out how to get rid of the static in his eyes. Now, there's been some back and forth whether or not he was bullied in school or if he was the actual bully. So supposedly when he was overweight, he was bullied for that. But by his senior year, he was no longer bullied and he was starting to get aggressive towards his friends and became more of a bully. But there's been back and forth accounts of that.
And from what I've understood, a lot of the bullying came from girls. Like, I think they made fun of his weight. He tried to have relationships with these girls. And from what I understand, just it was years of rejection. And what makes this all the more interesting, what makes him interesting is, by all accounts, he had a very tight-knit family.
Yeah.
Like, there were never any issues at home. He was close to his sisters. You know, he's not your typical, he didn't abuse pets. He loves animals.
Yeah. And nobody's talking about the wetting the bed. It doesn't look like he had those typical characteristics of that, but it does look like he had a God complex, which is he went into psychology. He wanted to essentially, I think there was a quote that I found that he wanted to study criminals and be involved in capturing violent criminals so he could counsel high profile offenders. So it wasn't like he didn't want to do the garden variety murderer. He wanted to do really high profile serial killers, and he thought he was smarter than everybody else. Which I find interesting because he does that, but then he has all these issues where he's suicidal, he's blank, he has no emotion. And then that's around 2000, because in the article they were talking about when he actually started the heroin, which was in 2013 and 2014. And he did it with his old friend, Rich Pasqua. And Mr. Pasqua said that Bryan was socially awkward and didn't have many friends at the time that he was doing heroin. And his parents obviously found out because they sent him to rehab. And he, for all accounts and purposes, got his life back together again. He graduated from Northampton Community College with an Associate of Arts degree in psychology in 2018. He then got a bachelor's degree from DeSales University in psychology in 2020 and a master's in 2022. And he said he had drug issues in the past, but he didn't want to talk about them. He had gotten over them. And he also told an old friend of his that went on record with this New York Times article that said that he confessed that he had been depressed since he was 5 years old and had developed a weird sense of meaning. And that was a quote, developed a weird sense of meaning.
If only he had shared this. Obviously, he tells his friend years after the fact, but it's just to keep that all inside must have just driven him to this point of, I just can't handle society nor myself, you know?
Yeah, or women for that matter.
Right.
He went on to research criminals and studied under Catherine Ramsland. Now, Catherine Ramsland has not gone on record at all. I have no comment. She's a renowned forensic psychologist who has written dozens of books like How to Catch a Killer and The Mind of a Murderer. Carrie Rawson, who is the daughter of BTK killer Dennis Rader, tweeted that Ramsland had a friendship and academic relationship with her father, and that she thought that Bryan had contacted Dennis Rader to start a relationship with him as well.
Yeah.
And it also has emerged, I'm sure you've seen this, that Bryan had applied for an internship with the police department in Pullman, Washington, because he wanted to help fix their systems to catch murderers better. And so I think going to your point that he felt bullied by women, from a bunch of news articles, it said that Bryan was condescending and contrarian with other doctoral students in the criminology department,
Mm-hmm.
especially women,
Mm-hmm.
and that he got into such an altercation with one female doctoral student that she ran out of the room after she claimed he was like mansplaining her.
Yeah.
But everybody said he was a curious student, really interested in the psychology of killers. And here's an interesting thing, and this was from one of the earlier articles when his name was attached to this set of murders,
Mm-hmm.
that when he was a teaching assistant in his criminal law class during that fall semester, that he was really harsh at grading, that he wouldn't address the students while looking at them. He would give extensive critiques on assignments. Right around the time of the killings, he gave the students better grades and just very little feedback. As in,
And
he was
his
like,
one of his students said he appeared a lot calmer, like his whole
yeah.
demeanor changed after the murders, and the students mentioned the case. Obviously, they wanted to, and he did not. He shied away from discussing the murders in the class, which is really interesting.
Which is very interesting as well, which kind of, I
Yeah.
mean, my theory, because this is pretty much work to the end. The one thing that has come out recently is that a local shop owner of a vape store said that he overheard and talked to Kaylee and a bunch of her friends that she had had a stalker for the last 3 weeks before her death. And she was traveling with a group of girls to try to keep the guy away from her. That she said that there was somebody following her in and out of bars when she was out at night, and she was pretty scared. But the police have not found any evidence or connection to Bryan or his victims outside of the cell phone ping data and his car driving by the Kings Road evidence 12 times,
Right.
casing the house from June to November.
Mhm.
So, and then now this is where the gag order has happened. So we're not getting any more information about what the cops have on him.
Mhm.
Again, I personally think that he did it
Mhm.
because of the DNA. I don't know how the defense is going to, as you said, where's the knife, right? So they don't have the knife,
Mhm.
they have the knife sheath,
Right.
but it has his DNA on it. And between that and the car and his cell phone pings, I mean, I don't know if we're ever going to get necessarily a motive outside of if they actually do finally find evidence of Kaylee having a stalker. And then you said you found footage of one of the roommates with him.
Yeah, there is this bizarre security camera image of, I believe, one of the survivors. I don't know if it was DM. I forget who the survivor is, but it appears that she's hugging Bryan. And a lot of people are. The problem is there have been so many armchair sleuths online. And they were saying, actually, in the beginning of this whole thing, a lot of their accusations and theories were throwing off authorities. They obviously wanted to follow leads, but since everyone has their theories, and so that was one that just threw people off. Like if they did have a connection, what was it? Was it ordinary for him to stop by the house? See, the problem is because it was an off-campus housing, and a lot of the folks there were involved in the sororities, and that it was basically a train station. Like there were so many people passing through that house. It was kind of an open door for people to just hang out.
Right.
So it's also interesting.
That's hard with the evidence. But did you were talking that you were mentioning that you had seen somewhere that they had found dog hair on something of Bryan's.
So when they got the search warrant, they inspected his apartment, and they found like the only one thing that really stood out was a reddish brown stain on his pillow. They did find a dog hair. They're not too sure if it's a match for Murphy. What's really interesting is the things that they found in his house were ordinary, and they didn't find the knife. A lot of people are under the impression he ditched the knife somewhere.
Did you ditch the knife? I mean,
yeah.
that's the connection, right?
And then going back in Pennsylvania, he frequented a bar a lot, and apparently he was really weird with women that were at this bar and would harass them to a point where the bar owner had to pull him aside and say, listen, you can't come in here if you're going to keep harassing our patrons. And they actually had him like behind the bar. They knew if he came in to like just keep an eye on him. So that's pretty interesting.
Wow.
Then there were all
Yeah.
these speculations that he had been direct messaging the victims, right, on
That's right. I
Instagram.
saw that in a I saw that on People magazine, and that she didn't actually respond, but he was persistent. Like he sent a bunch of messages to her.
Yes. And then I found out in 2015, he went on a Tinder date with a nurse, and they were both psych majors, and they
Mhm.
became friendly. They went on a date. She said he was a little weird, but nice. And after the date, he says, "Let me take you back to your dorm. Like, let me." And she's like, "No, I'll be fine." He says, "Let me come back." So she agrees to go back to her place, and he kept tickling her.
Mm.
And she said, "Can you stop tickling me? Like, I feel this is really, I don't feel good." Listen. So
Yeah.
he stopped and felt really bad or whatever, left, but then for days kept texting her. And one of the texts he sent her was, "You have great birthing hips." And this is when
Yikes.
and the nurse said that was it. That
No.
she wanted nothing else to do with
Okay,
him.
creep.
Really creeped
Yeah.
him out. And then we also have this handle, Papa Roger, who was on Facebook on a sleuthing page, a group discussing this case and other cases. And this handle, Papa Roger, which a lot of folks are associating with Bryan, would ask questions such as, "Oh, well, if the weapon is a knife, maybe they should search for the sheath." Another post, he says, "Oh, the killer probably entered from around the house." And so people started to take notice with these weird kind of posts from Papa Roger, but they haven't been able to connect whether or not that he is actually this Papa Roger. And then by now, I'm sure you know, and everyone knows that he had a Reddit forum where he
Yes.
kind of reached out. "Hey, are you a criminal? Have you killed anyone? What was your thoughts? What was going through your head?" And that, I mean, is he trying to fish for ideas on how to do
Well,
this?
so this is where my theory of his motive comes in. This might be completely off base, and again, this is just my theory. And but because he had studied with Catherine Ramsland, and she had become a renowned forensic psychologist by writing a bunch of books about certain cases and her thoughts on those cases. So I'm just going to throw this out there. I know it might sound crazy, but
Yeah.
I'm thinking that his motive for the killing was that he wanted to do a notorious killing, get away with it. When he got his PhD degree, 3-4 years later, he would write a book as an authority on the case with exactly what the killer was feeling and make a name for himself. I know that sounds awful, but it's like in his twisted mind, he already thought that he was some sort of genius, character, but that people didn't see him as a genius yet. And so that's was like what I came up with, outside of the fact that he was stalking this girl and she rejected him and he just lost his mind. But because of the fact that he had studied under psychologists, that he was in criminology, like I really think that with these men who have such egos, that he wanted to see what it was going to be like, and so he could write about it and make a name for himself.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is obviously a case where he wanted to explore, he wanted to get into that mind with the intent of reaching that level of a Bundy, of a BTK.
And get away with it, and then write about it.
And in the way, because of social media, in the way that you would have Son of Sam writing to Breslin, and you have messages from Zodiac, that he's using Reddit and Facebook as a way of
to
doing
do the same thing.
Like, try to catch me. I know some things.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's just this. I mean, again, he's innocent until proven guilty and has to go through the justice system. But just from everything that the police did such a good job of detective work on this case. I don't see any other possible killers in this case at all. And it really does seem like they got the right guy. And then it's just a matter of the motive. Like, yes, obviously he could potentially have been an incel. I didn't read anywhere that he ever had a girlfriend.
Right.
And then I did hear about him being really creepy with women. Is it one of those things like an incel, he saw a girl, she rebuffed him, and then he just like
had enough.
But then again, why didn't he kill the other 2 female roommates?
Right.
He just didn't think he had enough time.
And also he walks away, which I find interesting.
Versus running away.
Yeah, she sees him, she closes the door, and he just calmly walks away. There's no running, there's no frantic.
But maybe it's one of those. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, and then I guess he gets into the house again because they're so used to having everyone come over. There was no break-in. There's no sign of, breaking a door or a window to get in. It seems like he was just able to get in. There are some things that really bother me too. I can't help but going back to the Greek culture and the sorority culture. I've seen so many cases where people will pledge, but then they're excluded because they're not pretty enough. Or sometimes they'll seek revenge or have a whole bunch of the sorority ignore a certain person. So there's one of the theories is that maybe this was not like a hitman for hire, but one of the things is like when this happened, it didn't really bother the sorority, that it just came with the territory, which I find crazy, but I don't know that culture too well. But it may have been one of these things where, oh, good, we don't have to deal with them anymore. And maybe that's why these two were spared. They're thinking that maybe these two had like they were upper echelon of the sorority.
Oh, I see. I think I see. So you think that like somebody might have hired Bryan to take out the 4 kids? Well,
so he had appeared at some of their parties. That's the other thing.
Oh, he had.
He had been there. Like he knew. See, so that's a question. How much was he there to party, or was he there to case out and see what the layout of the house was?
Or was he stalking again?
Right.
Like these guys get fixated on a woman, and then again, if she rebuffs him, did they fixate more, like he did with the nurse? Right. She said stop, and then he just kept coming at her.
Yeah. Also, he's always claimed that, and he's told people with regard to, hey, why are you always in this area? You keep going over there. He said that shopping was best in Idaho, that they had an Albertsons that was open late, they had convenience stores that were open late, and he preferred to drive in that area, in their neighborhood, to do shopping. And he often did it late at night. So,
well,
actually, I don't know just what having that
this
means.
Right, because I was just thinking having this conversation because the neighborhood that they lived in had a lot of Greek frats and sororities, as well as off-campus housing for those frats and sororities. If I'm a defense attorney, I'm going to say, well, how do you know he was casing Kings Road? What if he was maybe he was fixated on some other girl in another sorority and he was driving by the house? Because again, they only have the car and the pings, and if you have a very saturated place of sorority girls, then the case as a defense could be made. Why did it have to be them? Couldn't it have been another girl that he was stalking? Which again is maybe he has a connection. Like who knows how many girls he was stalking at one time.
It definitely reminds me. It's a throwback to that horrible crime scene when Ted Bundy did the same thing. And so
with the sorority girls.
And when into the room and there's a witness who hears like something going on and she doesn't know if her friend's being intimate with someone
and he would have known that because he was obsessed with Ted Bundy. He would have known that because he was obsessed with Ted Bundy.
Precisely.
Right.
So I think he's like, I'm smart as these guys too. I can do these things.
And then the cops, and like when the media gets a hold of it, they can connect me to Ted Bundy because it's a bunch of sorority girls.
Right.
And I left one. So there's like a connection, which again, his brain could easily make that kind of crazy ass connection.
And then also, when you mentioned his applying to become a cop with that police force, it also brings to mind Ed Kemper. Big Ed Kemper hung out at the local pub where cops went. And he apparently was always talking to the cops. What new cases are you guys working on? And he was so outgoing and so personable that the cops shared a lot of their information with him, which is why I believe he was able to get away with so much of his crimes before eventually being... And he ultimately turned himself in. So
he did. The cops never even found him. They were like, he's like, I did this.
Yeah. And I think that had to do with like maybe I feel like once he kills his mom, he's just like, okay, I'm done. I have respect for the police. I didn't become a cop, but here's my thing. So I think maybe this was another way for Bryan to get into that world. If you're a cop, it's usually very hard to prove, right, that the cop is actually responsible for any sort of murders. So maybe he wanted to go down that path and be, you know, a criminologist / police officer. It's easier for you to get away with these things.
Yeah.
If you hold that sort of position.
Right. Exactly. And I was actually thinking, I had like one last thought about how he calmly walked away from the roommate. Maybe I've read some things about bloodlust, but after they have committed the crime, a very violent crime, they go sometimes into a piece of calm because of all of that energy is out. And so like a lot of times there have been cases where they've just gone to sleep because like now it's just like everything's just been let out. Which could be a reason why he just walked by. But anyway, it's a fascinating case. We are definitely, I'll keep abreast of the situation, as I'm sure everybody else in the United States are, to see what's going to happen. It looks like his trial is probably not going to start until the end of the year. Right. And with the gag order, I don't know if we're going to get any other information.
So I'd like to ask you 3 quick questions.
What's that?
One is, do you think the father knows anything? He's driving with Bryan. As soon as this happens, they're on their way to Pennsylvania. Do you think?
But here's the thing. Well, like for the parents, like outside of his heroin habit and his snow in his eyes, he doesn't have the trifecta of the serial killer. He probably didn't wet his bed. He hasn't killed little animals. I forgot what the third one is. But so like as a parent, you'd probably just want to be like, oh my God, this is just, maybe there was another white Elantra and it's not you. And to keep the hope. And from everything that I saw in the news articles I was researching, the family's in shock. I mean, his sister's a psychiatrist. Like they're like, oh my, we don't even know what's happening. And he has said that he's innocent. Like he is not saying he's guilty.
He's not going to take the plea, I don't think.
No, I don't think so either. And so I think because as a parent, you're like, my kid could never do this.
Yeah, absolutely. I hear you. Also, it's interesting to know Idaho does not have an insanity plea.
Oh.
Which I didn't know. So he can't plead insanity.
But he has not shown any sort of insanity in this whole case. He's always been very calm and collected outside of that like freak out face when he got pulled over. But even then he kept it together.
True. But I wonder how much the static is, you know, the defense may try to use that and be like,
as the snow static that it's right. And by the way, that hasn't even been kind of diagnosed as a condition. Like
I know,
still up in the air. Like it's there, but they have very little studies on it. What's the second question?
The second question I had for you was, being that it was apparently pitch dark throughout the house, how much can we rely on what the suspect looked like?
Well, here's what I think was it really pitch dark? Like, did they have curtains on the windows? Because if you have a street lamp right across from your house, there's always a lot of ambient light in a place, unless of course you have blackout curtains. So granted, we live in Los Angeles. We always have ambient light. I don't know in Idaho if they're as light as we are, but I would think that if there was any sort of light coming in, that she could have absolutely seen him. But again, also it's 4:00. She's scared. She's sleepy. She could potentially be drunk. So at that point, like maybe it was too dark. But she was very specific about the bushy eyebrows.
That's true. That is true. Yeah, that's a thing. You know.
Yeah, and because if he was only 2-3 feet away from her, then she could see his height because he would have been taller than her.
That's right.
Right, and then I think she probably did see enough of him.
Yeah.
I wonder if she was able to pick him up out of a lineup, or if she's just like so full of PTSD that she wouldn't be able to.
It's also interesting to note that apparently they're saying that there's going to be a great star witness, and that's their neighbor. I don't know his last name, but apparently his name is Inan. Neighbor.
Oh.
He's in the spotlight right now. They're saying he's going to make a great witness because it's interesting. He has a YouTube channel. He's a chef, but he hasn't made any posts since December 23rd, around the time of this.
Maybe he saw something. Maybe he saw Bryan.
Yeah, he said he got home at 1:30 a.m. and he also heard a male scream at around 4. So there's that, and he saw a white car without state plates.
I see.
So
he can place the car at the scene.
Yes.
With the out-of-state plates.
Also the scream. And also he was the one that mentioned, like, unless you know this area, there's no way that you would know where this. It's just
it's really deep in there, because I was looking at maps of the place, and even like that Queen Road, it's a dead end. So there's like no reason you'd be going in and out without being there for a specific reason. Like it was very specific and out of the way. I don't know how the defense can be like, oh, he was wandering around neighborhoods, right?
And I actually had one last question for you, and that is so apparently, according to a security guard who's at the place he's being held in jail, he spends most of his time balled up on the floor, not even on his cot. He's in a ball on the floor a lot of the time, won't eat.
Do you think that's a plea? Well, because there's no insanity in Idaho, so he can't play that. I mean, he must be suicidal, maybe?
Well, so that's what I was going to ask you. What do you think? What do you get from that, knowing that he's like sitting? I'm not going to plea bargain anything, like I'm innocent. Also, I forgot to mention, when they first arrested him, he asked, "Did you arrest anyone else?" And then he asked, "Are they going to be co-defendants?" Which is very weird. And so now there's speculation: did he have an accomplice,
or is he just trying to essentially muddy the waters because he got caught?
Right. But I was just wondering what you feel of what's the psychology behind balling up on a prison floor.
Well, he can't believe he got caught.
Right.
He's like, oh shit, how am I going to get out of this?
Right.
And especially like for an ego that thinks so highly of himself, like, per what his classmates said, he thought he was like the smartest guy in the room. Like that would be like an ego break. Like, oh my God, I made a mistake. That's not possible, but here I am. How am I going to get out of this?
Yeah. And then there was another weird thing that I found was he was wearing gloves apparently.
Mm-hmm.
But then how could the fingerprint get on? But then that's debunked because the theory is he grabbed everything he needed, then put on the gloves.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that just shows that he was the owner of the knife sheath, even if he didn't actually leave fingerprints that night.
Right.
Which I think. And what do you think? Like, do you think he did it?
I keep going back and forth because yes, my gut tells me he did do this. But what makes it so weird is it's just so much circumstantial evidence. We could talk about him being an incel. We could talk about him having a hatred of women. The question really is, was he able to cross that line? Did all the criminology, all the psychology into these serial killers have an effect on him? Which I believe it did. The only reason why I hold back sometimes is just, again, the Greek life, the sororities and the frats. They really do everything like in and out, protect everyone.
I see.
They can be sort of malicious, and I think that when they saw the video footage of the cop threatening to call the Greek council, that may have really, because it was at their house, at this house. So I think they were like, they're going to really tarnish the sorority's image.
But would you kill?
But again, I don't know.
But for something like that. Yeah, because also if you're talking like kind of a hit, well, that's like gun country, Idaho. So why would somebody just not, like, knife murders are so personal. Like, you have to get in. Typically you hurt yourself with the knife, right? So like a lot of times that is a very unique way of killing people. That has to do with like rage, and a lot of times they say stab wounds are instead of sex. A lot of these people get off because they're not able to complete unless of course it's kind of like another way of having sex is killing somebody with a knife, because you have that penetration, which I know is awful.
And if you feel
To
so
even
rejected by
say,
women, I mean, that could be, that's like his sexual
right.
appearances.
I mean, my big thing with is that, like, how is he able to do 4 people? But then if he was in full on bloodlust with the adrenaline and these people were sleepy and maybe drinking, so it was
yeah,
sluggish, then
yeah,
maybe, and especially if it wasn't 6 minutes, then yeah, it's like boom, 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 which again is just horrible. These poor
horrifying.
kids that this happened.
I do,
But
at the end of the day, I do feel he did it. And I guess what confuses me is, again, like trying to figure out the motive. Whenever it's not clear cut,
mhm,
that's where I'm just kind of like, this doesn't make sense. Like, even though I know he did it, it's
right.
hard for me because, again, a lot of these things circulate online. They circulate in the media. Was he stalking them online?
Right.
You
Like
know,
what is the connection to that house?
right.
Right.
That's what I just don't get. But obviously there is one. Obviously he did this and he's in utter shock. But I do find it very interesting, the gag orders and his not wanting to take a plea. I just can't.
Yeah.
I can't. And then his defense lawyer is going to be defending him while she, on her conscience, was defending that's so weird. Was defending
That's just so weird.
victim's
Well,
mom.
then also, because like when I was doing research on who he was, it sounded like his parents were well off. So why is
Yes,
he having a public defender instead of like some high
right,
priced attorney? Right. Because I mean,
right.
this is like their son's life on the line. If I,
Yes,
God forbid, had this happen, like you'd try to get the best lawyer you could for your
that's a
kid.
great point. That's a great point.
And like, why is he with a public defender? And so does the family know something
Right.
that they're just not saying? Because I mean, they don't want to have that shitstorm on their heads coming out, right? Like, and blame and everything else.
Well, I think he did a terrific
It's a
job of mapping out the house, because that really is the confusing thing. Even after I watched 3D models, I'm still.
yeah, it was really hard. It was just like, where, because originally, like some articles said that both of the roommates that survived were on that bottom level,
Right.
so almost like that basement first floor level. But then that didn't make sense with DM and how she saw him walking out of the kitchen. So
Right.
then when I was able to get the floor plans, it's like, oh, but like literally her bedroom was like 5-6 feet away
Yeah.
from when the murders were happening, just on the other side of the living room. So just to imagine like what short of a distance she was away from that room. And then again, why didn't she hear the Ethan screaming? Like he obviously screamed. So
Yeah.
again, there's like, but again, with the chaos of the night and the fear, God only knows. It's like your lizard brain takes over at that point in time. Like,
100%.
and they always say witness testimony is terrible because your memory does very weird stuff to protect you. It could potentially, she has totally blocked out a portion of this because of survival, right? Like between the survivor's guilt and the fact that she saw him walking by her, and why didn't he kill her? And could she have called 911? There might be such severe trauma blockage in her. Like I can't even, it's just such a horrifying crime, which is probably the reason why it's been all over the news for the last 2 months.
Absolutely.
Circumstantial evidence is still evidence. There's a lot of people who are tried on circumstantial evidence. And, I mean, there's, even with all the cameras we have, like outside of having actual video footage of somebody killing you,
Yeah.
I mean, it is all kind of circumstantial evidence, right?
100%. I think the smoking gun is that sheath.
Yeah.
That's the true. I don't know how.
Yeah.
I don't know how the defense is going to explain that.
No, I don't either. Except for if like he lent it to somebody, but then he has to pin it on somebody else, and who's he going to pin it on when he doesn't have any friends?
Right.
Yeah, so fascinating case, and
Absolutely.
Thank you, Chris, for joining me and taking our conversations on the stoop out onto the pod.
Having me on. This is I honestly don't, other than myself, have anyone to talk to about this kind of stuff. So
Well, I'll
I'm always happy.
definitely have you on again because there's more. It's been a very violent start of the year. There's been so many cases that have come out in the last 3 weeks. I'm just
Yeah.
like, what's the point of doing older cases when you have this thing happening now?
But also, what's
Yeah,
interesting to that is we're seeing more serial killish abduction cases than just the mass shootings. Like we're kind of getting back to heat of
the
passion.
glory days of the 70s and 80s. Well,
Yeah.
do you know there's actually 5 serial killers working in LA right now? I think that was the statistic.
Wow.
So, yeah. But that'll be on another episode. let's not talk about that.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, thanks everyone for joining us and listening, and we will be back next week. Not sure exactly which case, and we'll definitely have Chris back on again because it's a lot of fun talking to somebody about a case and not just all by myself. So, take care of yourselves out there, and thank you for listening.
This episode was sponsored by The Creek Killer, Book 1 in the Harriet Harper thriller series written by me, Dominika Best. What would you do if you read The Police Found Your Body in a Creek? Find out in The Creek Killer, available on Amazon. Thank you for joining me and listening to this episode. If you like my show, please give me a rating and review. It helps other listeners find this podcast. Follow Dominika Best Presents The Deviant Mind wherever you listen to your podcasts. Visit thebeststorytellingnetwork.com where you'll find show notes, my books, links to social media, and much more. Join my Patreon for special subscriber perks, like 2 extra exclusive episodes a month and a Q&A with me at patreon.com/The Deviant Mind Podcast. Until next time.